Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. We welcome all of you to the SkillsFuture Month in collaboration with Smart Nation 2021, organized by SkillsFuture Singapore and Smart Nation Singapore. Our speaker, Miguel, will be sharing the topic, JavaScript Sprint. Throughout the session, please feel free to post your questions in the Q&A tab that you see on the right panel. Do take note, questions will be moderated. Miguel, please go ahead.
Hi, hello everybody. A very warm welcome to this JavaScript Sprint. I hope that you can see me and hear me well. Before we get started with an introduction, I would love to get a feel for the people we have in the room. And I wonder, Celestine or Francis or anybody on the admin side, if we could fire off the poll that was loaded just to get a sense of who's in the room, what's their experience with coding, and what is it that they would like to get out of the workshop just before we kick it off. Would that be possible, please? Maybe I can launch the poll directly. Yeah, so it's already launched. And everybody, you have two questions. Do you have any experience with coding at all? Is this your first time writing lines of code? That's perfectly fine. If you don't have any experience at all, that's perfectly fine. And what's your goal for the workshop? Is it because of curiosity? Is it more because of career ambitions? What is it that is driving you to spend the next while with me? All right, so there we are at 34 out of 50 replies, 35 going up to 40, and the bag is getting more and more mixed. Good, so we have a few replies left, but I think we get a good read on the room. So a big bunch of the people have never wrote a line of code before, so that's enough for me to just go very slowly today. Some people have maybe done some short courses online, and some people with experience. So if some people are up for a wilder ride to the end of the workshop, we can try to do something more difficult for people with a little bit more experience, and with people who can write applications on your own, for that one person over there. And I hope I don't bore you too much, because we're going into the fundamentals today. And then mostly people, it's some people with some degree of interest in changing their careers, but most people just generally curious about coding and learning, which is fantastic. Great. Thank you very much for that. I'm just going to share the results with everybody so you can see it. But yeah, I'm just a little introduction about myself before we get started. I'm Miguel. I take care of Wagon in Singapore. We are a tech school. And let me just share the screen with you so you can get to know me in a better picture and my team. We are Wagon, and we have been in Singapore for the last 2 years, but we're a big school. We're in 42 cities around the world, and according to some sources, the most acclaimed coding bootcamp in the world. This is me, this guy over here with the blue background. I come from Spain originally, but I've worked all over the world, and my background is in psychology and product management. Although I do teach in the web development because I really like coding and I love building things. So if you like it as much as I do, even if you're on the functional side, eventually you just get drawn and teach more and more. And I have some great people working with me. I have brilliant data scientists that have worked for IBM before, like Solomon Prima, who's an absolute genius, have coded chatbot completely on his own. Senior developers from other places in Singapore. So if you ever want to come and shout out and just say hello, you're always welcome to just hang and learn, and no need to join a coding bootcamp just to spend time with us. So that being said, we are going to dive into today, and we're going to go into JavaScript. So I'm going to introduce you to a platform called Learn, which is where we host all our online courses. And here in this library, on my courses, batches, there we go. I have a little course over here called IMDA SkillsFuture's Learn JavaScript. I'm going to open that, and for this teaser session, how to learn JavaScript, we're just going to see the content. And in this platform, I have exercises that you could do tomorrow before our next workshop, which is going to be build again with JavaScript. So today is the essentials. On Friday, we'll actually build something real. And you have access to the slides that I'm going to be going through. You have access to the video, and you have access to some exercises. So to access this, I'm just going to give you a token that I'll plug in on the chat. I'm just going to copy that and throw it in the chat and share it with everybody, all panelists and attendees. And if you go into the chat now, you'll see a link that takes you to samlearn.levagon.com/onboarding. And if you go there, you'll get access to the same platform where I am right now. So we can all be in the same page. You can watch a lecture replay if you want to, or you can do the exercise tomorrow if you're up for it. So that is where you need to go to make sure that you have access to the same content. And for today, at the beginning, we're going to be coding in this environment called JSBin, which is an online tool that allows us to play with JavaScript without having to install anything, just to make it very comfortable for everybody. So I'm just going to throw that over there. And if you go to JSBin, you'll get access to an interface that looks a lot like this. And we'll be using this for our session. If at any point anybody has any questions or there's anything you want to know, just throw the questions in the chat or in the Q&A. I'll be monitoring it every once in a while just to make sure that I can reply to your queries, make sure that I can clarify anything that I will be explaining. Without further ado, let's dive into the session and let's go into the slides. And let's go into JavaScript spread. Very good. So we're going to be exploring the basics of JavaScript today. And we're going to be writing some code. There's kind of two modalities for today's session. You can either choose to go forward and lean in and try to code with me as we go on JSBin or in the tools that we're going to be using. Or you can choose to lean back and say, like, look, I just want to observe. I just want to see how this works. And I will try later. Either way, I'm going to go at a pace that adjusts for both. So it's depending up to you how you want to have your experience. About JavaScript, it's a language that's been around for quite a while. Around 1995, a guy called Brendan here in the US was working at one of the very first browsers. So I don't know if there's people old enough to remember Netscape over here, which were the first one who punched the hole in operating systems and were able to give the internet out to the public. And when they were creating this browser, they said, like, hey, we need an actual programming language that allows the browser to do things and do a lot of computer science things that we don't need to go into anymore. And this person was tackled with the job to create this programming language, which at the beginning was very, very basic, very rudimentary. It was just a scripting language. It didn't have many of the capabilities that it has today, but they needed to make it fancy. So back in 1995, the key thing that was around was Java and Sun Microsystems, right? So they baptized it as JavaScript because the word Java was catching in the technology community, but in reality, they don't have anything to do. Like Java and JavaScript are two very different things, and they should not be mixed up. Right? So if somebody is kind of poised at you saying, like, hey, yeah, I know like Java, JavaScript, ask them if they know the difference, because if they don't, they're just fronting. And since it is an in-browser language, it means that you can't access it in your browser, and your browser is a developer environment where you can actually type code. And if you're on Chrome like this, or Firefox or Safari, you can go to any tab in your browser. And if you right click and you go into inspect, you can go to the console. And over here, you have just a terminal command where you can start writing JavaScript code. Hello, everyone. And that will evaluate to valid JavaScript. So you can try out JavaScript directly in your browser because your browser is consuming JavaScript from other websites all the time. So that just is something that you should know. Like, you can always play with JavaScript in the terminal, not even without the need for JSBin or anything like that. You already have JavaScript in your browser. It's just a little bit more difficult to access and a little bit more obscure, but it's there for you. So that's our intro about JavaScript. We're going to be working with JSBin, as I mentioned. So that's on that should be on one of your browser tabs, so you can play with the code that we're going to be looking at today. And this is what we're going to be using to write our code. The little symbol of JSBin looks a little bit like that. What we're going to be covering today, the first 3 parts of the session, a little bit more computer sciencey. What are the basic data types? How do we represent things in JavaScript? What are the basic objects? What are lists? What are arrays? How do we do control flow? How can we manage conditions and loops? And we're also going to talk a little bit about functions. How can we have little pieces of code that are always supposed to be doing the same thing? And we're going to isolate them into functions so we can always repeat them. And after that, we start to have fun with JavaScript. So we're going to look at DOM manipulation. DOM stands for Document Object Model, and it's the way we can manipulate websites with JavaScript, which is a key thing that JavaScript is built for. And we're going to talk about event handling. So event handling sounds very technical, but at the end of the day, it's just if this happened, then I'm going to do that. So whenever you are on your browser, you're on a website, you click on a button, you swipe on something, and then you see some sort of feedback, or you're sending some data or receiving some data after that. Imagine that you're on Netflix and you click on a movie and then the movie starts streaming. That's event handling, right? When you click, there's a movie that starts showing up. And we're going to do the very basics of that so you understand the foundations of what JavaScript is for. But we're not going to go into something as complex as Netflix, obviously. We're just going to change some colors and make sure that a very small website is interactive. If you guys are up for something a little bit more complicated, for those people who have a little bit more experience, we'll try to make an API call, get some data, and throw it on the website. Cool. So let's start with basic data types. We have numbers in JavaScript, and you can notice that for the number type, you have 42, you have 3.14, you have 0, -1, right? So it doesn't matter if it's an integer or not, if it's a float or not, if it's negative or not, it will always be a number. And in the moment it's a number, that means that you can run computations with it. You can add it, you can multiply it, you can sum it, you can subtract it. You have strings, and string is the word that we use in programming languages to represent text. So whenever you see something in between quotes, it's something like a piece of text that you have in a data structure, and that's about it. You could, of course, have characters like 4-2 within a string, but that would not be a number. It would be a piece of text that looks like a number, but it's not exactly the same way. So let's look at what I mean by that. If we go into JSBin, for instance, you can see that at the top, I have HTML, CSS, JavaScript, and console, and the output. So the only things that we need right now, we don't need HTML. Make sure that you don't see this. We don't need CSS. So HTML and CSS is what makes a website become visual and be able to see the structure and the style of it. We don't need that right now. You only need this tab, JavaScript, and the console, which is going to show up whatever we do over here, whenever we evaluate this thing on run. And the output is the actual website that would get compiled. We don't need that either. We don't need the output. So let's imagine we have 3 + 4 over here. This would be 2 numbers. We can run all the way here to the right. And you can see that nothing shows up. I need to log it on the console. So whenever I do console log and 3 + 4, this expression will evaluate and show in the console. You can see that I get 7 over there. I can subtract it. I can multiply it if I want with the star symbol and do any sort of mathematical operations. Just notice though that if I wrap it in quotes, now I'm going to get unexpected behavior because these are not numbers anymore. These are strings, right? It still works kind of, but if we do this, for instance, if we add it, notice that I get 3.124. It's putting the strings together as opposed to adding the value, which should be 7.12. Right? So if you want to do numbers, make sure that you have numbers. If you want to do strings, make sure that you have strings. If you want to say hello world, which is the very typical thing that you would do at the beginning of any programming language, you can just run it and you can see that I get it over here on the terminal. Okay, so these are two basic data types. This is the interface that we're dealing with. Any questions until here? Okay, did everybody follow? Does anybody need anything before we continue? Just looking at the Q&A. No open questions at the moment. Looking at the chat, and the chat seems to be okay. Great. So I'll just continue. And we're going to go back to the slides and see more data types. We have Boolean and we have undefined and null. So Boolean is going to be very handy when we want to do control flow, which is when I have something, then I'll do something else. If I have this kind of value, then I'll do something. If this user is authorized into the system, then let them in. Otherwise, throw an error and tell this person is not allowed, right? Booleans are super, super handy for managing the logic of your program. And then undefined and null are data types that are special for knowing when something has not been defined yet. So imagine a variable that is waiting to be filled, or a value that is not valid, and we keep it as null. So we have two different ways of representing that. On the Boolean side, we have true and false, and we can add these values together to know if something is true or false, depending on the combination of the logic. So if you remember Boolean tables from high school or something like that, maybe you try to do something like this. True, true. And this will not return anything because I'm not evaluating it. Let's clear the console, and console log true and true. And this will return true because one of the terms is true. But if one of them is false, doesn't matter how many of them are true, because as long as one of the clauses is false, then everything will evaluate to false. The other way you have to look at it, you can also use the OR operator, where you just need one of the clauses to be true. And as long as you have one true, then it's fine. You can put all these as false, and it will still give you true. Right, so you could use this for things like, hey, if the weather is sunny and the humidity is under 60%, if those two things are true, then recommend the person to go for a jog today. But if only one of them is true, then maybe recommend to go for a hike. And something along those lines, right? Like when you're playing with the clauses and you're going to execute different logic on your program, depending on what is true and what is false. Great. On JavaScript, we also have objects. And objects let us represent things that are a little more complex and might have many different properties and behavior. So we might have something like a musician, when this stored in a constant, stored in a variable, and it's going to have two properties. It's going to have the first name, and it's going to have the last name. It might have a favorite instrument. It might have an age. It might have many, many things, right? Depending on how you're thinking about this musician and the properties that it should have. We can read it. We can change the property inside, and there are different ways to do so. We can use this square bracket notation with the strings inside, or we can use this dot notation, which is the preferred way in JavaScript. Let's try it out. So let's go to JSBin. And over here, we're going to have a const that we're going to call musician. And you can see that I have two curly braces over here and a space. I'm going to have a name for that musician. I'm going to call it Miguel. And instrument, we're going to call it Miguel plays the guitar. I can try to console log that musician and then run the code. And you can see that I'm getting object, instrument, guitar, name, Miguel. I can now say, well, let's try to get the name of the musician. And I will only get the name, will only get this particular property. And I can access that as well, like this as well. We run it, and it still gets it, right? But it's much more readable to do it like that. And so if you want to play with that code while I continue, I'm just going to put that in the chat. And you can pick it up as we go. If you want to change an object, or you want to, what we've done now is read it, but you can also reassign the value. So we can put an equals and then call that Ringo. And then even though this is John, this will be Ringo later on. Something really important in programming is the use of variables. And for defining variables, which are like boxes where we're going to store values inside, we have two keywords in JavaScript. We have let and const. Let is something that can be reassigned. So imagine that you're keeping track of a counter or some sort of tally, and you're updating that sum all the time, right? So for that, you're going to be using let. And this is a way, if you're working with other programmers, of letting them know when they read the code that, hey, man, this variable that I'm declaring over here is supposed to change over time. So keep that in the back of your mind. Well, if you have a constant, the constant cannot be reassigned. If in the moment you have a constant and that constant is first name, and you have a string over there, if you try to put a number into first name later on or a different name, it will not work. Let's try that out. So let's clear our terminal and let's have let sum start at 0. By the way, whenever you finish a line in JavaScript, it's considered good style to do it with a semicolon. You don't always have to do it, but sometimes you will see me do it just out of habit. And if I want to update that sum, and I can say, well, the sum is equal to itself plus 56. So I'm increasing the sum by 56 when I do this. I can also log the sum. And when I run it, you can see that I get 56. If I change this to a const though, and I try to reassign the sum, I get an error right away that says like, assignment to constant variable. What you're doing over here is not allowed because this is a constant. So something to keep in the back of your mind, right? When you are working with things that can be changed, like sums, like tallies, there's no problem. But there are things in programming that you don't want other people to tamper with. Imagine a password. You want that to be a constant. You don't want anybody to just change it just like that. Imagine a credit card number. Things like that need to be very securely managed by the computer. And const allows us to do things like that. In the variables, as you can see, we can store values. It's a little bit like a box. It's a good analogy to refresh ourselves. And if you want to console log first name of John, then first name, which is the variable that we just seen, it will pop out the value that was in the box, which is John. Right? So at the end of the day, the boxes are pointers to values that we're storing in memory in the computer. All right, guys. So let's get things working. And if we have two constants of strings, we can try to concatenate them together. And there's two things we can do that. We can either do it mathematically, quote unquote, with a plus, or we can use something called interpolation. Let's try to do that. So let's go back to JSBin. Let's clear this and imagine that I have a first called hello and a second called world. And what I want to show, you see this, by the way, this double forward slashes means a comment. It's code that will not be evaluated. Whatever I type over here will be ignored. And the output that I want is something like this. right? So I need the first plus a space plus a word. How can I do that? First thing I could do is first plus a space plus a second. And that will allow me to compose strings. Another thing that I can do is interpolation. So I can wrap all this into backticks. And then after those backticks, I can put a $sign. I can forget about this quotation marks. And I need to wrap whatever I want into curly braces. Right, so what this is called is interpolation. And what am I getting? And expect the end of the program. This is fine. And I can throw variables over here in a bigger string of text and still run it. Right? Hello, second is not being interpolated. There we go. And I get hello world. So this and the previous line, which was just doing plus and space, lead you to exactly the same result. This is preferred, especially if you are templating strings into bigger chains of text. Right? So what I would like to say to you all is hello world. And if I run it, now I get a longer string, and on the placeholders where I just want some things to be changed, I'm interpolating the variables that I want, right? So this kind of mechanic of interpolation is something that you would see very typically in emails, for instance, right? When an email arrives into your inbox and says, hello, your first name, and then a blurb of text that is exactly the same for every other customer. But that little piece of personalization can be achieved with interpolation, for instance. Good. So we covered our first demo. Just checking if there are any questions on the Q&A. Seems like we are fine. So checking out the chat. Seems to be also fine. So let me just move on to the next section, which is conditions. Right? We can use these three keywords: if, else if, or else. And this is the basic way to think about it. If I have a condition, I can run some code if that condition is true. Else, I will run some code if that condition is false. So let's try to create something like that. As an example, you can also do if, else, if. With the first condition, if that runs, otherwise second condition, otherwise a default condition that will run if both the first one and the second are false. Let's try that out. So let's imagine, go to JSBin and clear my code. I'm going to have a first constant that is weather, and this is going to be sunny. So I can say, well, if the weather is sunny, we can console log, you should go for a run. Else, console log, you should watch Netflix. Run that code, and it tells me that you should go for a run, because these two things are exactly the same. What you see over here with 2 equals, which can also be more correctly even 3 equals, it's a comparison operator. So I'm making sure that whatever is on this variable matches this string. And if it matches, then I'm going to go here. If it doesn't match, then it will go over here. Rainy. And then I get, you should watch Netflix. Imagine that we think about these variables in a different way. We say we have a constant that is sunny and says true. Const dry, or call it temp for temperature in degrees, and we leave this at 22 degrees. Right? So you can say if it's sunny equals true, and the temperature is under 25, should go for a run. Now I can have another condition that says, well, else if sunny equals true, but the temperature is over 10 to 5, say you should go for drinks in the evening. And if none of that is true, console log, better stay at home today. Let's see what this gives us. Right now, my temperature is 22 and sunny is true. So it tells me that you should go for a run. Now, if I keep sunny as true, but the temperature is going to be really hot, it's going to be 38 degrees, Spanish summer, tells you, well, good weather, but you should go for drinks in the evening. If it's actually not sunny and pretty cold, you should better stay at home today, right? So you can see how the control flow is working right now. Did that make sense for everybody? Because in the moment that you enter the world of JavaScript for real, right, and you're starting to see all these brackets and all these equals and all these brackets and more brackets, it starts to get a little bit mind-bending. So I hope everybody can follow up for now. Okay. So moving on to the next, Boolean algebra and logical AND. This is a little bit what you just covered. And you can keep it now that you have the material as a quick refresher if you need to know how this works. If you have two variables and you're trying to make sure that you're trying to look at them clauses that are together, if with the logical AND, if you have false and false, it will return false, false and true, false, true and false, false, true and true, true. Another way of saying it is that you need all the things that have an AND to be true. In the moment you have just one that is false, everything will evaluate to false. Or it's the opposite case. You use the OR with this operator, and you just need one of them to be true, and everything will return true. Right? So the only case that returns false is when A and B are false. Imagine that A and B would be something like hot and sunny, right? And if both of them return false, then the result is going to be false. You can go into the else condition of your conditional and do something with it. You also have the logical not. So you can have a bang at the beginning and say that what you want is the reverse. So if you have sunny with the ampersand, sorry, with the bang, it's going to be false when it's true and true when it's false. Let's try that out. So imagine that sunny is false, right? So we can say if it's not sunny, if it's not sunny only, you should stay at home with friends, and we can remove this condition. Else if, let's put it at the beginning first. So if it's not sunny, you should stay at home. And else if it's sunny, it's true, and temperature is under 12. Okay, so now notice that I have this bang over here. Since it's not sunny anymore because it's false, it will go straight into the first condition. If it's true, then it will not evaluate the first condition ever. But in the moment I put it false, the first bang is going to kick in, and it's going to kick into the first condition. Cool. So using this, we're going to build a quick validator to see if a word starts with a given letter or not. And we can set a word like Benjamin, and we want to know if it starts with the letter B or not. So back to JSBin, clear everything. I'm going to have a const name that is going to be Benjamin. And what I want to know is if Benjamin starts with B or not. So something cool about characters and strings is that I can access them with this square bracket notation. And for each of these characters, what you see over here are the index positions of each of the characters. So if I try to console log this, name 0, you can see that I'm only getting B. Right? So I can use this to take my validator and start writing my if condition. If name.0 is exactly B, console log true, because this is exactly what we're expecting. Else, console log false. In this case, returns true if we have Benjamin like that. Doesn't work if we have lowercase b, also not going to work. This is only going to work when the first character is actually a b. Great. So that's how we work with this. And the next step that we have is loops and iteration, how to work with for and for each. So this is like the traditional way of working with loops in JavaScript. Just so you know it, and you're going to see maybe if you, after this, you try to do your own tutorial, you're going to see a little bit of code like this. And old school loops in JavaScript look extremely intimidating. What this old code, what all this is saying is for a loop where I, your starting position is 1, you're going to go until I goes until 10, and you're going to increase I plus 1 on every loop, right? So if you try to do that, console log I is going to give you 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, all the way to 10. For today, we're going to work with something a little bit simpler, which is for each, which is a more declarative way of working with loops and less intimidating for a day, or we're just getting started. So we're going to do this instead. Iteration over an array. An array is another data structure where you can keep lists together and index them in different positions. So imagine that I have const teachers, and I have Benjamin, Arthur, Lucien, and Alex. Let's have something like that on my JS bin. Const teachers, and I have a list. And over here, I'm going to have Miguel, I'm going to have Prima, I'm going to have Solomon, I'm going to have Hanji. And these are my teachers. And I want to now iterate through all these teachers, right? So I want to console log all of them. And I can do teachers, and I want to get the one on the first position, which is Miguel. So this is 0, this is 1, this is 2, this is 3. Lists, just like words before, strings before, they start at 0 with the counter. So if I do console log teachers, then I get 1, 0, 1, 2, and so forth, right? So imagine that I want a piece of code that goes through every single teacher, and imagine my list is not 4, but 400, right? I cannot repeat this line of code 400 times. It would be very difficult to maintain. So for that, we have things like loops. And what I want to do is, well, teachers for each. And then over here, what I need is a callback. This is like a little function. We're going to go into that later. But what I type over here is like, hey, what is the thing that you're iterating on? I'm iterating through a teacher. So for each teacher means that on every loop, every time I loop, this is one of the elements. And I want to console log teacher. And this is arguably way less intimidating than what we had before. Let's clear everything so it's easier to see. And you can see that this spits out these 4 guys right away, right? And doesn't matter how many I have, it's going to continue to add values, right? And print out everything together. So this is how you do it. Teachers for each teacher, console log the teacher, and you're already iterating through an array. So if you know how to iterate through stuff, through collections, and you know how to run if conditions, you can do a lot of powerful stuff. Let me share that code with you in case you want to try it out. And this is another thing that we can do, right? We can now build a list with names, and we can see if each word starts with the letter B or not. This time using an array. So what we can do now, within this block of code, we can write an if condition, because we have that teacher variable inside that we can play with. And we can say, well, if the teacher 0, the first character, is a S, console log the teacher. Oh, I pressed on the app. Damn it, very good. Like they put the green button to so not just you to click. We clear this, and now the only output that we get is Solomon, because it's the only one that starts with an S. So just to illustrate that we can run conditions within collections and it works perfectly fine. Let me get you that code as well, in case you want to try it out. Cool. Cool, so functions. Now what we've been doing until now is just wrapping code all together into into a script, but there's no way to repeat it. There's no way to make it a little bit more organized so it becomes reusable. And that's what functions are for. We can get little snippets of code into something that we call a function. We throw some input into the function, and then we spit something out. And we can reuse it as many times as we want in our code. To define a function, this is a little bit now how it works, right? This is like the syntax, pseudo syntax for it. You would have a function name, and you're going to have between brackets what is the parameter, the input to the function, the code that you need, and at the end, it's going to be a return value. So you need to see functions as a little bit like a factory, where the parameter is the input, the things that you're throwing into the factory, and whatever you return is the output. Whatever you've done to that input, you've done something in the middle of the code. When you return it, it's up and ready to work. So if you want to call the function, you just get this function name that we have over here and call the argument on the top, right? So this function name would be this function name, and this argument would be an actual value that we're passing. So to do that, we're going to write a function to capitalize a name. We got with the function that we want to call is something like capitalize Benjamin, and the output should be Benjamin, right? So here you can see this is the input to the function, this is the argument, and this is the output. This is what we should return. So let's try it out. We're going to have const that is going to be called capitalize, and this takes a name and my brackets, right? And now you can see console log function is here. Let's try to call capitalize with any name. This is me. I run it, and even though I'm passing an input, I'm not really using it, and I'm just console logging function is here, right? So the code flow right now is I go over here, JavaScript looks for this function in the code, finds it, passes the input inside, and then runs this code over here. So what I would like to get, the output that I would like to have is Miguelito, right? So you could say that to get any given name, you want two things. First, capitalize or get the first character and make it uppercase. Get the rest of the name and make it lowercase. Put both strings together and return it. Right? So this is what I'm doing now with all these comments is what we call pseudocode, and is when you're looking at a problem in computing or in software development is just basically think through it in English first, and then you figure out a way to implement it, right? So getting the first character, and we already know how to do, right? You can say, well, the const first is going to be name 0, right? But now we have another question. So like, how do I upcase it? How do I get the rest? How do I make it lowercase? How do we get both strings together? We know already how to do that. You can put const rest. It's going to be something. And we know that what we need to return is first plus the rest, right? So that's what we know about the code. But we need to figure out a few things, right? How can I make something upcase? For that, something that we need to do as developers all the time is looking into documentation. So we can go to MDN, which is where we have most of the documentation for web development that you might need. JavaScript is the language of the web, so it makes sense that the best documentation for JavaScript is on MDN. And we can look for MDN string. And here we can look for all the methods that we can call in strings. And something when you go through this list, you will find is that we can do, for instance, to uppercase. And to uppercase will return the calling string value converted to uppercase, and MDN already gives you a place where you can play with stuff. So for instance, over here, I can do sentence to uppercase, and this will already give me an uppercase. It's pretty good. So I can do this to uppercase and call that method on the string, and I know that my first is going to be uppercase already. Now, the next question is, how do I isolate the rest? How do I go from character number 1 to the rest of the letter? So for that, think we have substring. And you can see, for instance, over here in the example, if we have Mozilla, when we console log substring 2, it goes from Zilla all the way to the end. So it stands to reason that if I change this to 1, it will be Zilla or Zilla. If I have this as Miguelito, it will get Miguelito, which is exactly what I want. So I need this code. And I can put it on rest. So I can say main and get my substring from 1. And after that, probably I want to do it to lowercase. And so if I have 2 uppercase, then I will have 2 lowercase too. And then I just want to return it, right? I just want to return first plus rest. So I'm going to put this into a result variable. Const result is going to be the result of colon capitalized, and then I'm going to console log result. And see what happens. Clear and run. Cool. And I get this uppercase. Let's try with something a little bit weirder. Does this work? It works, right? So now we found a very basic algorithm that will capitalize a word no matter how you pass it. Cool. We covered a lot of ground so far. Just checking in, see if we have any questions. Again, pasting the code, making sure that you have what you need. If you want to try it out. Anything on the Q&A, no open questions, okay? So let's continue. We have the DOM. Now we're moving from, we've covered all the basics, all the foundation of JavaScript. Now we can have some fun with the document object model and an event handling. The document object model is how you structure the DOM, which is how you see websites every day. Excuse me. It's modeled a bit like a tree, where you have everything under a tag called HTML, and you're always going to have a head that has all the intelligence, all the metadata, everything that Google is using, Instagram, Facebook is using. Whenever you share a page and there's an image showing up already, that info is on the page. And then you have the body, which is the stuff that you actually see. And for that, there's different tags like H1, P, or whatever that give the browser rules on how to represent them. So if we have H1, that's going to be a header. If we have P, it's going to be a paragraph, and so forth. So for our HTML tree, we have something like this. We have the HTML, which is the whole document, the head, and then within the head, you might have title, you have metadata, you might have stuff for search. And then within the body, you might have an H1 or P or something like that. If we want to look it up in the browser, it can get very complicated quickly. So if I go to a website, I don't know, if I go to Mothership, and I want to look at the HTML that my browser is getting from Mothership, it's huge. Right? So if I look at my elements and I just try to unwrap the head, this is a mature, complicated application. It has lots of stuff, right? So just the meta can become overwhelming very quickly. So just for today, we're going to try and see what can we do with something a little bit simpler. As if we go over here, it's going to be very difficult to get feedback that it's valuable and it's easy to parse for our eyes. So instead of this, we're going to go to purdue.com, which is the simplest website you can imagine. Like, it only has a header, it only has an H2. Right? And over here, I can play with the HTML very quickly. Are you lost on the internet? And don't worry, we're here to help. Right, so I just manipulated the DOM, which is the document object model, by typing on it directly on my browser. But what I want to do this with JavaScript. I want to do this programmatically. So first, I can figure out the code, and then I can write actions on the code that do something. So over here, let's go back to the slides. We're going to be on purdue.com. Let me show that in the chat as our sandbox. And we're going to be playing with the DOM over here. Something that JavaScript gives you to select elements is query selector. Is a method that you can call on document. Document is the DOM, is the whole thing. And you can pass a selector to isolate a piece and start to play with it. If you want to get a tag, you can pass the P onto that selector. If you want to get a class, which is something that we'll see eventually in the page, you can use this .red or any name of the class that it has. And if you're looking for an ID, for those who have a little bit more web development knowledge, you can do it with this selector. So let's try to select the header with this code, document query selector H1. And on Purdue, can go to the console, and I'm going to say const header is going to be the result of doing document query selector, and over here I'm going to pass a string. I'm going to pass an H1. It returns undefined, but when I print out the header, you can see that this lights up, and I get the H1, and I can start to manipulate it. So just with code, I can say, well, I want the inner text to change to something different, like I am not lost anymore. And you can see that now I changed it with JavaScript, which is great because that means that I can automate operations, I can write functions, I can write conditions, and then use that to change the website. So with that, you can change an element, you can remove it completely from the website. So that header that we have, we can remove a class if you want to. We can toggle a class. We can change the inner text, as we said right now, or you can even change the display and make it disappear. If we got that H1 back, header, and I want to change the style, and I want to say, well, my display, I want it to be none. You can see that it disappeared for now. And of course, this doesn't disappear from the original website. If I reload, everything goes back to the way it was at the beginning. But while the website is here, I can change those manipulations. I know that this example looks a little bit silly, but when you go into Netflix, for instance, right? And you're hovering through stuff and the elements are changing and you click and there's things showing up and then you're hovering through stuff and things are changing in front of your eyes and there's text showing, all that is DOM transformations. It's just that it's JavaScript in the background doing a lot of that work. It's just that it's way more complicated work that takes days and weeks and months to get done. So these are some of the transformations we can apply. Let's imagine that we want to turn this into red, right? We want to turn that header into red, and we want to change it to lost on the internet with a little bit of emphasis. So we can apply this code. We can select our header again, and our header, I want to change the inner HTML, and that's going to be an EM and an EM for emphasis. And are you lost on the internet? And I want another line of code that is the style, and the color of that text is going to be red. You can see that now I got a little bit more of an aggressive change. And I go, now, are you lost on the internet on change? And it's completely red as well. Cool. So we've already done this. We've already selected our first element of the doc. Remember, what you need is document query selector. And now that we have that, we can move into something better, which is event handling, which is where the real interactivity kicks in. And now I'm writing the code to make the changes. What I want is to apply the changes when the user does something. And events occur on very specific objects. So different events that you're triggering all the time. Your browser can listen to almost anything you do. Whenever you go into a text area, you're triggering the blur event, and you can register it, right? So that's why many times when you're filling a form, when you go into a field and something pops up, the blur event is kicking in. Of course, whenever you click on something, on an invisible event, you can click it and then something will happen. You will get a pop-up, you will get redirected. You will register data and send that data to a service to make sure that they notice that you clicked on something. That can also be mapped with a click. Whenever you focus on something, whenever you key up, whenever you touch a key, or whenever on your keyboard, you can listen to that. And almost anything you could imagine. And also on mobile devices, if you touch start, if you're getting things started in your mobile device, it's there. And the method that we need to make this happen is adding a listener. So if you want to listen to a specific event, you can react to the event in the callback and make it work. Let's try to go into an example to see how it works in practice. We're going to go back to the website that we have. We're going to clear all this. And what I want to do is whenever I click on this thing, on the header, I want to turn it black again. So what I want to do is document add event listener. And I want to add event listener on a click. And when that happens, what I want to do is get my header. And whenever I have clicked on the document altogether, the header color will be black again. Oops. So that's that. I need to write the whole function and close it over here. And close it over here. Good. That looks way better. Cool. So whenever I click on the document, let me reload that. I screwed something. So my header is my H1. Let's put the event listener click. And whenever I click on the header, I want to trigger a function. And what I want to do is with this header, change the color to red now. And change that and close the event listener. Cool. Undefined. I click on it and it's not registering my click. Why are you doing this to me? That makes more sense. Cool. So that works, right? Whenever I click now and I call that function, it will be red. Now, every time I click it, it will stay red, of course. I can reload my page, tap up to see the same code again, and header is not defined. Let's select it, and whenever I get this code again, I have a click ready. So whenever I click on this thing will become red, which is great. So that's how we can handle events. I see people dropping out already because it's quite late at the end of the day, so I don't want to go into more complicated use cases. But I just want to let you know, I have over here for Friday, another course where we're actually going to build a game with JavaScript. So what I would invite everybody to do is to go into the program with the token, go into the exercises and try to work through them until Friday. So you're going to get a lot of it. You're going to learn the basics. You can refresh you can refresh what we covered on the slides and the video, and try to work through some of the challenges that we have over here. We have concatenation, conditionals, array iteration, functions, DOM interaction, and listeners. If you work through that and you come on Friday, you're going to be in a very good spot to build your first game with JavaScript and start building those skills. So with that, thank you so much. This was Wagon. If you want to know more about what we do and how we work, please check us out. We're here in Singapore. We'll leave the website over here. And I'm looking forward to seeing you on Friday. I hope that you have enjoyed it. And on Friday, we're going to build a game, so it's going to be much more interactive. We went through the foundations today. It's of course a little bit drier, but we need to learn to write before we can compose programs and compose more complicated things. I thank everyone for being here, and I hope to see you very soon on Friday. Thank you. If anybody has questions, if anybody is struggling to access the website or anything, please let me know. You can also send me an email at miguel@thewagon.com. I'm just posting it right there. So if there's anything you need, or you have any questions, you need resources, just shout out. Always happy to help. Great, thank you everyone. See you Friday. Thank you so much. Thank you. So without further ado, I think I will close the call unless any of my fellow peers in NDA need to close officially or say something. Very well, then I'll see you all on Friday. Thank you so much. Take care.
Ladies and gentlemen, before the session ends, please scan the QR code and provide your feedback or comments on the webinar. And lastly, I'd like to share with you about our skills and training advisory service. If you're not sure how to get started on your upskilling journey, you can sign up for the free one-to-one skills and training advisory session, where a skills ambassador will guide you in understanding your career goals and provide suitable course recommendations. Simply scan on the QR code and indicate SFMX Smart Nation in the mandatory field, how do you hear about us, at the bottom of the registration form. Our skills ambassadors will contact you within 2 to 3 working days. We have come to the end of the webinar and we thank you for joining us. Hope you have gained important insights from our speaker. Thank you and hope to see you in the other sessions.